Charles destroys Camilla's biggest move to secretly make her son king. Camilla wasn't thinking like a queen that day. She wasn't thinking about duty or reputation or tradition. She was thinking like a mother. And that's what made her dangerous. The conversation started simple. A quiet afternoon in Clarence's house. Mint tea, polished silver, and the kind of silence that builds tension, not peace. Charles sat across from her, already exhausted, as if he knew what was coming. Camilla leaned in, fingers delicately wrapped around her teacup, but her eyes, they were locked in, sharp, focused. "I think it's time Tom received an honorary title," she said, like she was asking him to pass the sugar. Calm, calculated. "It doesn't change the order, it just recognizes loyalty." Charles put his cup down. That was never a good sign. "Camilla," he sighed, already shaking his head, "Tom's not royal. The press won't see this as kindness. They'll call it nepotism." Camilla wasn't shocked. She'd prepared for this. She knew every move before he made it. "We can frame it," she replied, voice smooth. "Tom's been a quiet servant of the crown. No scandals, no drama, a stabilizing figure. This is the kind of gesture a modern monarch would make." But Charles wasn't buying it. Not fully. Maybe part of him wanted to give in. Maybe the husband in him understood. But the king in him, the man who'd waited decades for this throne, he couldn't let go of precedence. So he didn't say yes. He didn't even say maybe. What he said was, "I need more time." Camilla left that room with a polite smile, but her heart was already pounding. She knew what more time meant. He wasn't going to do it, not unless she forced him to. What followed wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't public. It was chess. Quiet, patient, ruthless chess. Camilla made her move at the next Privy Council meeting, standing before the nobles with a measured voice and a well-rehearsed pitch. "An honorary title for Tom Parker Bowles," she said, "a symbol of inclusion, modernization, and loyalty." The room went cold. You could hear the air shift. Eyes glanced at one another. Princess Anne smirked just slightly. Charles didn't wait long. "This proposal," he said in front of everyone, "I cannot approve." And just like that, the door slammed shut. Humiliation. That's what it was. Not just rejection, public rejection. Before the very people who once saw her rise from mistress to queen, Charles had cornered her, not in anger, in protocol, and that made it worse. But Camilla didn't explode, not in the way people expected. Instead, she smiled, nodded, sat down, and quietly declared war. The fog in London rolled in thick that week, almost like it knew something was brewing. Camilla was already dialing her old contacts, the ones from before the crown, the ones who owed her favors. Whispered lines found their way into newsrooms, Charles favoring Anne and William over his own wife, the queen consort being sidelined by the king. She's not welcome in the inner circle anymore. Articles exploded overnight. Commentators speculated, talk shows debated, social media ran wild, and Charles, he recognized the pattern immediately. This wasn't random. It was targeted. It was Camilla. He summoned her. "Try to talk her down. You're crossing a line," he told her, his voice more tired than angry. "This campaign, stop it. It's going to burn everything down." But Camilla didn't flinch. "Then give Tom the title," she said, like it was the only logical conclusion. And this. Charles refused. Again. And that's when she knew this wouldn't be solved with words. Not anymore. It was going to get messy. And Camilla, she was ready for it. The storm Camilla started didn't stay in the papers. It crept into Buckingham Palace, leaked into meeting rooms, and seeped into every corner of the royal family. Charles was still doing his duties, waving to crowds, hosting dignitaries, keeping the mask on, but behind closed doors, he was unraveling. So after some arguing, what happened between Anne, Lecky, Zaire, Dibidum? But the narrative had shifted. He was no longer seen as the unifying monarch. Instead, headlines painted him as cold, disconnected, playing favorites, and worst of all, It was working. Camilla had struck a nerve. She didn't accuse him of anything outright, but she didn't have to. That's the brilliance of it. The rumors felt real enough, and once public perception started tilting, Charles couldn't stop it. Even his closest advisors noticed the change. Approval ratings dipped. Articles popped up with side-by-side photos, Charles with William and Anne in high spirits, while Camilla and Tom were nowhere in sight. It all fed into the story she had crafted. But Camilla hadn't played her final card. Not yet. She knew Charles well, knew his obsession with image, knew that if she couldn't change his heart, she could shake his fear. And now, with the public behind her, she had leverage, but she wanted more. So she pushed again, quietly, subtly, but with impact. She whispered new things into the press. Little details, mentions of Tom's long-standing support, Camilla's dedication, how Charles might be repeating history by pushing family aside. It was all still vague enough to avoid blame, but sharp enough to cut. Meanwhile, Charles had his own countermove in mind. He'd had enough of the whisper campaigns and emotional blackmail. He wasn't going to fight in public. That wasn't how kings fought. He called in a trusted group of advisors, no press, no fanfare, just a room at Windsor Castle, lit by old chandeliers and guarded by silence. His instructions were clear. Investigate Camilla's charitable fund, every wire transfer, every receipt, quietly, thoroughly. He had his suspicions. The Queen's Outreach Fund had long been Camilla's pet project, and it had grown quietly into a financial empire of its own. But now, under scrutiny, cracks started showing. Money meant for social causes was being funneled into events with suspicious ties to Tom's ventures. Lavish dinners labeled as cultural outreach, conveniently held at restaurants Tom co-owned or managed. Donations rerouted into advocacy groups that, while publicly progressive, privately worked to boost Camilla's influence within royal circles. There were no outright crimes, but the pattern was clear. The charity was being used as a personal power engine. Charles read the report with a heavy heart. He could have exposed it. One press conference and Camilla's entire strategy would collapse. But he didn't want a war that public. So instead, he made a choice. Cut off the fuel. He signed an order transferring the entire fund to an independent oversight board. No consultation. No warning. Camilla found out through a formal letter handed to her by a shaken aide. Her hands trembled as she read it. All Tom's projects suspended. Her influence gutted. Years of quiet work undone with one stroke of Charles's pen. She didn't cry, not yet. She went straight to Buckingham Palace. No guards stopped her. No appointments made. She stormed into Charles's office, wet from the rain, fury in her eye. "You think this ends me?" she hissed. "You think cutting my legs out makes you the better king?" Charles stood behind his desk, arms crossed, voice calm but firm. "I think it stops you from burning everything down." They stared at each other, two people once in love, now locked in a silent, bitter battle. Neither one blinked. Neither one backed down. The silence after the confrontation was louder than any argument. Camilla didn't slam the door. She didn't scream. She simply turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing down the marble corridors of Buckingham Palace like a final warning. Charles remained at his desk, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of what he'd just done. He hadn't destroyed her, but he'd struck deep, and both of them knew the wound wouldn't heal easily. Over the next few weeks, a quiet shift took hold. Camilla was still technically the queen consort, still present at select events, still smiling for the cameras, but insiders noticed her schedule thinned, invitations dried up, meetings happened without her. Publicly, nothing had changed, but behind the scenes, the royal machine had closed ranks. She was being frozen out, politely, efficiently, and without explanation. And Tom? He bore the brunt of it. The culinary events once backed by his mother's fund were abruptly canceled. Sponsors who once clamored to work with him stopped calling. His once flourishing brand began to sink under the weight of scrutiny. He tried to reach Camilla, confused and anxious. "What's going on?" he asked, voice tight. "Why is everything falling apart?" She told him it would pass, that she'd fix it. But deep down, she knew the truth. Charles had made his move and it was working. Clarence's house became quiet. The same walls that once held whispered strategy sessions and confident phone calls now stood still. Camilla spent hours pacing the rooms, her phone silent, her influence slipping like sand through her fingers. She had built her power carefully, brick by brick, but it had never truly belonged to her, and now, stripped of the fund, with the press backing away and the palace closing in, she realized just how fragile her kingdom had been. The press began to notice. Stories speculated about her absence, tabloids hinted at health concerns, some suggested a rift in the marriage. But no one knew the full picture. Charles had kept it all hidden behind layers of formality. There were no leaks, no official statements, just a slow, suffocating fade. One afternoon, Camilla stood at the tall window in her sitting room, looking out at a gray London skyline. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just stood still, hand resting against the cold glass. She had played her hand, and it hadn't been enough. She had tried to secure a future for her son, to cement her place in history, to be more than just the woman in the background. But Charles had drawn the line, and when she crossed it, he cut the cord. But even now, even stripped and sidelined, Camilla wasn't broken. Inside, there was still something burning. Not rage anymore, not desperation, something colder, sharper, resolve. Charles, meanwhile, carried on. Public appearances, speeches, foreign trips. His calendar remained full, but those closest to him could see the toll. He had won, technically, but it didn't feel like victory. At night, in the stillness of his private office, he would stare at the fireplace and wonder if it was worth it. If the crown he fought so long to wear was now costing him everything else. Their marriage didn't end, not officially, but something sacred within it had died. The love that once helped them survive years of scandal, exile, and public ridicule had turned into a bitter, silent partnership. Two people living parallel lives under the same roof, united by title, divided by ambition. Camilla's story didn't close with scandal or exile. She stayed. She smiled. She stood tall at events, her crown still perfectly placed, but behind that quiet gaze was a woman who had tasted power, lost it, and learned the game for what it truly was. The court hadn't seen the last of her, not by a long shot.